You are listening to real HOA stories. The HOA tried to weaponize winter. My name is Derek Hall. I am a restaurant supply rep in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I was standing in 4 inches of slush watching Kathleen Davis slap a bright orange violation sticker on my windshield while she screamed that I was blocking emergency snow removal. She had a portable thermal printer in one gloved hand and a clipboard in the other, and she was smiling while she did it. "Smile. I am documenting this for the file," she said, loud enough that 2 neighbors stopped shoveling to stare. I had parked my van on the street to avoid the sheet of black ice that covered my driveway after the plow went through. And now, the Frozen Creek Association Design Review Board Vice Chair was treating me like I had committed a felony. She printed another notice right there in the falling snow, folded it, and tucked it under my wiper blade. "This is your second warning today," she said. "The tow company has been notified." I looked at her knit hat covered in snowflakes and her yellow parka reflecting the streetlight, and I did not say a word, because I was recovering from a torn shoulder ligament and I could not shovel fast enough to meet her insane timeline. The HOA claimed their winter compliance patrol started at sunrise, and I had to be ready. But the plow had buried my driveway exit at 3 a.m., and I was not about to rip my stitches clearing a berm in the dark. I moved to Worcester 6 months earlier for the restaurant supply job, driving a branded van to commercial kitchens all over central Massachusetts. The pay was solid, and the route was predictable, but I needed a place fast, and I took a townhouse in the Frozen Creek Association without reading the fine print. The neighborhood was a grid of identical 2-story units with narrow driveways and shared courtyards, and the HOA had a compliance chair who carried a ruler and a stopwatch to measure snow clearing times. I learned that the hard way when the first storm hit in December and Kathleen walked the block with a tape measure, checking the width of cleared paths and writing down timestamps. She wore a pair of metal cleats strapped over her boots and bragged to anyone who would listen that she could walk anywhere safely, even on solid ice. The HOA sent me a notice 3 days after that storm, claiming my driveway was not cleared to the required width within the required window. I paid the $50 fine because I was new and I thought it was a one-time thing. I was wrong. By mid-January, the fines were coming every week. The HOA had a vendor contract with a private snow removal company that plowed the main loop at 2 a.m., and the plows always left a berm across every driveway exit. The rules said we had until 7 a.m. to clear the berm and restore full access, but Kathleen patrolled at 6 a.m. with her stopwatch and her metal cleats and handed out violations to anyone who was still working. I got hit 3 times in 1 week, $50 each time, and when I called the management company, they told me the rules were the rules and I should set an alarm. I told them I was recovering from shoulder surgery and I could not shovel that fast. They said the HOA did not recognize medical accommodations for snow removal and I should hire a contractor. I said the storm always hit in the middle of the night and no contractor was going to show up at 3 a.m. for a single driveway. They hung up. The certified mail I sent to the board arrived 2 days late because of the weather, and Kathleen sent me a response saying late submissions were treated as non-submissions and the fine stood. She included a new notice claiming I had failed to salt my walkway and created a slip hazard. I had salted it, but she said the coverage was inadequate and printed photos showing a thin patch near my step. The fine was $75. I paid it because I did not know what else to do, and I was worried they would put a lien on my place. That was the moment I realized the fines were not about safety. They were a revenue stream, and Kathleen was running the operation like a quota system. I started keeping every receipt, every email, every envelope. I photographed my driveway before and after every storm. I logged the time the plow came through and the time Kathleen showed up. I saved the certified mail receipts and the tracking numbers. I did not know what I was going to do with it, But I knew I needed proof, because Kathleen had already told me she had done this before, and people fold every time. She said it at the January board meeting when another owner tried to complain about the timeline. She stood up in her yellow parka with her thermal printer on the table and said the compliance system worked because violators always paid rather than fight. I stayed calm because I had one piece of proof that would end the whole game, but I was not ready to use it yet. The second week of February brought the worst storm of the season. The weather service called for 8 inches overnight, and the plow company sent an alert saying they would clear the loop by 4 a.m. I went to bed with my alarm set for 5 a.m., planning to clear the berm before Kathleen showed up. I woke up at 5:15 to the sound of scraping and looked out my window to see a wall of packed snow and ice blocking my driveway exit. The plow had come through late and piled everything against the curb, and the berm was 3 feet high and frozen solid. I went outside with my shovel and my bad shoulder started screaming after 2 scoops. I was not going to finish in time. Kathleen showed up at 6:02 a.m. with her stopwatch and her metal cleats crunching on the ice. She looked at the berm, looked at me, and smiled. "Smile. I am documenting this for the file," she said. And she pulled out her phone and took a video of me standing there with the shovel. She said the berm was not an excuse and the rules required full clearing by 7 a.m. regardless of plow timing. I told her I was injured and I could not move that much snow that fast. She said I should have hired someone. I said no one was available at 4 a.m. She said that was my problem, not hers, and she printed a violation notice right there in the falling snow. She handed it to me and said the fine was $100 because this was my 4th violation in 30 days. Then she walked away, her cleats clicking on the ice. I moved my van onto the street to avoid getting blocked in, and I parked it in a spot near the corner where the pavement was clear. The spot was legal, it was not blocking any hydrants or intersections, and it was the only place I could park without sliding into the curb. I went back to work on the berm, and by 7:30 I had cleared enough to get the van back in. My shoulder was on fire, and I was sweating through my parka. I went inside to ice my arm and take some ibuprofen, and I was sitting on my couch when my phone started blowing up. Someone had posted in the neighborhood group chat that my van was blocking the plow route and creating a hazard during the storm. The post included a photo of my van with the license plate visible, and it said the HOA was calling a tow truck because I was refusing to move. I looked at the timestamp and realized Kathleen had posted it while I was still shoveling. I ran outside and my van was still there, but there was another orange sticker on the windshield and a printed notice zip-tied to the door handle. The notice said my vehicle was parked in violation of emergency snow removal protocols, and I had 15 minutes to move it, or it would be towed at my expense. I checked my phone, and the post was 15 minutes old. I looked up the street and saw Kathleen standing next to a tow truck with the driver, pointing at my van. I grabbed my keys and my tabbed binder with all my receipts and photos, and I walked up the street in the falling snow. The tow driver looked at me and said he had an authorization from the HOA to remove the vehicle. I said the spot was legal and there was no emergency. He said the HOA claimed I was blocking the plow. I said the plow had already come through and my van was not blocking anything. Kathleen stepped forward and said I was lying and the plow was scheduled to make another pass. I said I wanted to see the authorization paperwork. The driver pulled out a tablet and held it away from the camera angle so I could not see the screen, and he said it was all digital and verified. Kathleen smiled and said, "Smile. I am documenting this for the file," and she started recording on her phone again. I opened my binder and pulled out a printed copy of the state HOA complaint confirmation I had filed 2 weeks earlier. I had sent a formal complaint to the Massachusetts Attorney General's office reporting selective enforcement and vendor favoritism in the Frozen Creek Association snow removal program, and I had included copies of all my receipts and photos and timeline logs. The confirmation letter had a case number and a notice that the HOA was under review. I held it up and said I had filed a state complaint about the snow fine scheme and the selective enforcement, and if the tow truck touched my van, I would add it to the complaint as retaliation. The driver looked at the paper, looked at Kathleen, and said he was not getting involved in an active state investigation. He got back in his truck and drove away. Kathleen's face went red, and she shouted that I was making it up and the complaint was fake. I said I had the certified mail receipt and the case number, and she could call the Attorney General's office herself if she wanted to verify it. She turned and walked away without another word, her metal cleats slipping on a patch of ice. The group chat exploded. Someone posted that the tow truck had left without taking my van, and another person said they had heard me mention a state complaint. A third person said they had also filed complaints about the winter fines and asked if there was a group effort forming. By that afternoon, there were 12 people in a private thread comparing notes and sharing receipts, and we realized the HOA had been backdating winter notices to manufacture late fees. The timestamp on the printed notices did not match the metadata on the email versions, and the differences were small enough that most people would not catch it unless they checked carefully. The board was generating violations retroactively, claiming people had missed deadlines that had not happened yet, and collecting fines before the snow had even stopped falling. One owner had paid $300 in fines for a storm that hit on a Sunday, but the notices were dated Saturday and claimed the violations occurred before the storm arrived. It was fraud, and it was systematic. I forwarded everything to the Attorney General's office and copied the management company. The management company sent a terse reply saying they were reviewing the matter and the board would be notified. Kathleen sent me a direct message saying I was a troublemaker and I was going to regret making false accusations. She said she had the full backing of the board and the management company, and they were going to file a frivolous small claims case to force me into a snow day courthouse appearance. She said I would have to take time off work and hire a lawyer, and by the time I was done fighting it, I would have spent more than the fines. She said she had done this before, and people fold every time, and I was no different. I did not respond, because I knew she was panicking and trying to bait me into saying something she could use against me. The next storm hit 3 days later, and this time I was ready. I set up a camera on my porch facing the driveway, and I logged every minute from the moment the plow came through to the moment I finished clearing. The plow arrived at 3:47 a.m. and left a berm that was 2.5 feet high. I started shoveling at 5:15 and finished at 16:52, 8 minutes before the deadline. I salted the entire walkway and the driveway apron, and I took photos with timestamps. Kathleen showed up at 16:58 with her stopwatch and her clipboard, and she walked the length of my driveway looking for something to cite. She measured the cleared width with her ruler and checked the salt coverage. She spent 10 minutes inspecting every inch, and finally she said the snow pile I had created next to the driveway was encroaching on the common area grass, and that was a violation. She printed a notice and handed it to me. The fine was $50. I took the notice, smiled, and said, "Smile, I am documenting this for the file." Her face went white. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for the following week, and the agenda included a vote on new enforcement procedures and a budget review. I got a notice saying I was not allowed to attend because I was the subject of an active compliance investigation. But 2 other owners forwarded me the meeting packet, and I saw the line items. The HOA had been paying the snow removal vendor triple the market rate, and the vendor was owned by Kathleen's brother-in-law. The same vendor had a separate contract for violation notice printing and delivery, billed at $30 per notice. The HOA had issued over 200 notices in January alone, and the vendor had collected $6,000 in printing fees on top of the snow removal contract. The budget review numbers did not add up, and when I cross-referenced the vendor invoices with the actual storm dates, I found that the HOA had been billed for plowing on days when no snow fell. It was a kickback scheme, and Kathleen was running it. I printed everything and put it in a folder with a cover sheet that said budget review evidence and included my name and the case number from the state complaint. I made 3 copies and mailed one to the Attorney General, one to the management company, and one to the board president. I kept the original in my binder. The management company called me 2 days later and said they were suspending Kathleen pending an internal investigation, and all snow fines issued in January and February were being refunded automatically. They said the board was voting to terminate the vendor contract and hire a new company, and they were reviewing the enforcement procedures to ensure compliance with state law. I said that was a good start, but I wanted to know what was going to happen to Kathleen. They said personnel matters were confidential, but she would not be involved in any compliance decisions going forward. The group chat lit up again. People started posting their refund confirmation emails, and the total added up to over $8,000 returned to homeowners who had been hit by the fake fines. Someone posted a screenshot of Kathleen's LinkedIn showing she had updated her profile to remove the Design Review Board Vice Chair title. Another person said they had seen her moving boxes out of the HOA office in the clubhouse. The board sent an official notice saying Kathleen Davis had resigned from all HOA positions effective immediately, and the compliance program was being restructured under new leadership. The notice included an apology for the inconvenience and a promise to implement better oversight. It did not mention the fraud or the state complaint, but everyone knew what had happened. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmare tales. I thought it was over, but Kathleen was not done. She filed a small claims case against me 3 days later, claiming I had defamed her by making false accusations in the group chat and to the management company. The filing said I had caused her emotional distress and damaged her reputation, and she was seeking $5,000 in damages. The court date was set for late March, right in the middle of another predicted storm system. I called a lawyer and he laughed when I explained the situation. He said Kathleen had no case and the filing was obvious retaliation, but I still had to show up and defend it or she would win by default. He said he could represent me for a flat fee and we would probably get the case dismissed on the first appearance. I paid him and forwarded all my documentation. He said it was the most organized evidence packet he had ever seen from a non-lawyer, and we were going to be fine. The weather got worse. Another storm hit in early March and dropped 6 inches overnight, and this time the new vendor cleared the loop by 3 a.m. and left clean curb cuts at every driveway. I shoveled my berm in under an hour and had time to salt everything twice. No one from the HOA came by to inspect, and no notices appeared on anyone's doors. The group chat was quiet for the first time in weeks. People started posting photos of their clear driveways and thanking the new vendor. Someone said they had filed a formal complaint with the state about the old vendor and the kickback scheme, and the complaint had been consolidated with mine. The Attorney General's office sent me an email saying the investigation was ongoing and they would notify me when it was complete. Kathleen showed up at my door 2 days before the court date. She was not wearing her metal cleats or her yellow parka, and she looked smaller without them. She said she wanted to talk and asked if she could come in. I said no, we could talk on the porch. She said she was sorry for everything, and she was dropping the small claims case. I said I did not believe her, and I wanted to see the dismissal paperwork. She said she would file it in the morning and email me a copy. I said that was fine, but I was still going to show up in court just in case. She said I was being unreasonable and she was trying to make it right. I said she had spent 2 months harassing me and stealing money from the whole neighborhood, and a last-minute apology did not fix that. She turned and walked down the steps, and I watched her get into her car and drive away. She did not file the dismissal. I showed up in court with my lawyer, and Kathleen was sitting in the hallway with a folder. The clerk called the case, and we went into the courtroom. The judge asked Kathleen to present her claim, and she stood up and said I had made false statements about her and caused her to lose her position on the HOA board. The judge asked what statements I had made. Kathleen said I had told people she was running a fraud scheme and taking kickbacks from the snow removal vendor. The judge asked if that was false. Kathleen hesitated and said it was a misunderstanding and the budget review had cleared her. The judge asked to see the budget review report. Kathleen did not have it. My lawyer stood up and handed the judge a copy of the vendor invoices, the backdated notices, the state complaint confirmation, and the management company's suspension letter. The judge read through the packet for about 3 minutes, and then he looked at Kathleen and asked if she had any evidence that my statements were false. She did not answer. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice and told Kathleen she was lucky he was not sanctioning her for filing a frivolous claim. We walked out and Kathleen was gone before we reached the hallway. The Attorney General's office sent me a final letter in late March. The investigation had found that the Frozen Creek Association had violated state consumer protection laws by engaging in deceptive billing practices and selective enforcement, and the HOA was required to refund all snow removal fines issued between December and February. The vendor contract was terminated, and the vendor was being investigated for fraud. Kathleen Davis was banned from serving on any HOA board in Massachusetts for 5 years, and the management company was required to implement new oversight procedures and conduct annual audits. The letter included a check for $250, which was my share of the penalties the state had collected from the HOA. I deposited it and bought a new shovel. The board held an emergency meeting in April and voted to revise the snow removal rules. The new rules eliminated the sunrise deadline and gave homeowners until noon to clear their driveways after a storm. The rules also required the HOA to provide sand and salt at common area bins, and they prohibited compliance patrols before 10 a.m. The board apologized in writing to everyone who had been fined, and they announced that the bogus snow fines were being automatically refunded to everyone hit in the enforcement wave. The group chat turned into a celebration thread, with people posting their refund totals and thanking each other for standing up. The total refunded was over $12,000, and the vendor penalties added another $8,000 split among 30 homeowners. I ran into one of my neighbors a few days later while I was loading my van. He was the board member who had been fed up and leaked internal emails to me back in February. He said the board had voted to fire the management company and hire a new firm, and they were planning to rewrite the entire covenant to eliminate the most abusive rules. He said Kathleen had moved out of the neighborhood and sold her townhouse at a loss because no one would talk to her anymore. He said the new board president was someone who had been fined 6 times in January, and she was committed to making sure the compliance program never turned into a revenue scheme again. He shook my hand and said thanks for not folding. I said I had too much documentation to fold, and he laughed. The final twist came in May when the state published the full audit report. The report found that the Frozen Creek Association had issued over 300 fraudulent fines over 2 winter seasons, and the total collected was more than $40,000. The vendor had split the money with Kathleen through a shell company, and both were being charged with wire fraud and conspiracy. The management company had known about the backdating but had not reported it, and they were being fined and required to hire a compliance officer. The report included a section on best practices for HOA enforcement, and it specifically called out the stopwatch and ruler routine as an example of arbitrary and abusive enforcement. That section got quoted in a local news article, and people started sharing it in the group chat with laughing emojis. Karen's stopwatch and ruler routine got mocked by the room, and the HOA stopped selective enforcement after complaints piled up. I kept my binder for another year, just in case, but I never needed it again. The new snow vendor was professional and reasonable, and the new board never sent me a single notice. I stayed in the neighborhood for 3 more years, and every time it snowed, I thought about Kathleen printing violations in the falling snow and smiling while she said smile. I am documenting this for the file. The last time I saw her was in the court hallway, and I never found out what happened to her after the fraud charges. I did not care. I had my refund, I had my documentation, and I had the satisfaction of watching a budget review reveal vendor favoritism and expose the whole scheme. The state complaint confirmation was the trump card I had been holding, and when I presented it during the final showdown at the tow yard office and quoted Karen's own words back to her, the tow driver refused to touch my van and the whole operation collapsed. Karen got embarrassed when her own quote played on speaker during the board meeting when someone played back the recording of her saying she had done this before and people fold every time, right before the management company announced her suspension. The board president read it out loud and the room went silent, and that was the moment everyone realized the enforcement program was never about safety. It was about control and money, and Kathleen had been running it like a personal fiefdom until someone finally called her bluff. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all the support.